Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with
Chris Lackey.
And Mike Mason.
and today we're going to talk about the newest Call of Cthulhu book from Chaosium that's coming out on Halloween, Cults of Cthulhu. Very intrigued about this. Personally, myself, cults and different denominations has always intrigued me. So first things first, and you could have gone in any direction when it comes to Cthulhu in terms of theme and setting and time. Why Cults of Cthulhu?
Well, I think going back to the original work, Cthulhu is the primary. I mean, it's the names in the game, for crying out loud. So it's, the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. Let's get into cultists, because cultists are a ubiquitous part of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and we thought it would be a good idea to really deep dive into the cults, how they work, what they believe, variations on the different cults, and if you want to make your own cult, how would you go about doing that? What are some steps that you would take? What's the process? What are the things you need to think about? And that was really important to us in writing the book.
Yeah, just to sort of add on to that, often in Call of Cthulhu, there is some sort of cult involved, and also monsters and things like that. And when you're kind of dealing with a monster, there's various things can happen in the game, but not normally you run away screaming or get eaten or whatever. Whereas when you're dealing with human cultists, the human side of the Cthulhu mythos, there's a lot more opportunity and possibility, because you're dealing with other people, basically, however twisted they are in their kind of corruption of the mythos. So they make quite interesting adversaries in that way, and you can do a lot more than them than just have the monster appear, if you see what I mean. So it does give that kind of a wider breadth of possibility in terms of constructing plots and the dynamics of interaction between the cultist characters and the player characters. And as Chris said, it's called Call of Cthulhu, and one of the things I'm very aware of over the years, actually Cthulhu and the broader kind of Cthulhu cult is something that hasn't actually appeared a great deal in many of the game publications. I mean, there's occasional, Cthulhu occasionally pops up in there's a couple, 2 or 3 kind of campaign kind of things, and but there's not really been an exploration of the human cult of Cthulhu, and that seemed, as Chris said, a great place to sort of start this kind of look into this sort of subject matter.
So in the book, there are 5 cults that keepers can use immediately for their games. As much as you can spoil, what can you tell us about these cults?
There's a few different cults. There's a cult set in the 1860s or 1890s in London. There's another cult set in California in the 1920s, and another more modern cult. But there's also some cults that are built in the as examples in the how to make your own cult section. So with that, there's 3 other cults that are developed as that. So you can take those cults and use those in your campaigns as well. And those we try to change them up, make them as different as possible to kind of show you what you can do with a cult and how different each cult can be, even though they still worship basically the same God, how different their interpretations of the teachings, the words, the ideas, what dream messages Cthulhu is sending them. They could be really different adversaries, and you can have a whole game. You can play for years just fighting Cthulhu cultists and never really touch a monster and be getting different stuff all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's the 3 kind of very deeply written up cults that Chris mentioned in chapter 2, and then the 3 that I use as examples. So that's 6 cults, and then there's 2 further ones in the chapter 2 that are fully detailed, which come from Lovecraft's writings. So you have the esoteric order of Dagon, and also the Louisiana Swamp Cult. Well, both of those cults are mentioned in the Call of Cthulhu story, but obviously, as many things in Lovecraft's original stories, they're not particularly fleshed out. They're hinted out, and you have very little detail to go on. It's kind of patching that together and filling in the details to kind of develop a broader picture of what those cults might actually look like in the period they're operating in. So all in all, that's 8 cults, I think, isn't it? That have a fair amount of detail to them, alongside many others that are more briefly mentioned throughout the book. A keeper that wants to kind of do their own invention sort of stuff, using some of the guidelines and advice within the book, can extrapolate those and decide, oh yeah, I want to build this cult, and I'll take this as the basis, and then build upwards from there.
So Call of Cthulhu books tend to be incredibly research books. So in your research for this book, were there anything that you come across that either helped inspire you to write, or maybe kind of disturbed you a little bit about some of the things that history has revealed?
Usually the really disturbing stuff is the real stuff. There's been a lot of terrible people doing things to people that they think are terrible, but maybe aren't. People that are accused of witchcraft, people that have a different version of a religion. That's a lot in history, that people will do despicable things to one another, even though they're really not that different. But if the difference is slightly different than my belief, then that's reason to kill you and all your family. So that stuff is a big part of human history, and looking at cults and religion, that stuff comes up. I know it's not very fun to talk about, but that's always one of those disturbing things that when I'm reading history, I go, why do people like killing each other so much? It's crazy. And making a cult, and this is a game, so we're trying to make it fun, having that detached. The people in these cults are really doing horrible things, so they really are bad guys, as opposed to somebody that has a slightly different religious view or philosophy than one person has. But yeah, that stuff is really terrible.
Yeah, I can't really add much more to that, other than to say, human history is full of horribleness, and because it's dealing with humans, and humans have a wide capacity of ability in terms of emotionally, and in terms of practically, in terms of what they can do, from the saint-like people to just very despicable types, and that's the wonder of humanity, in a sense, and history just reflects humanity. And so when we're dealing with humans in the game, it obviously mirrors the reality. And the game is based on a version of reality, whether it's set in the 1920s or modern day, or Dark Ages or Gaslight Victorian. It's still dealing with humans, and whatever time period they're in, there are some humans who are dodgy and bad, and others are steadfast and good. And so when you're kind of researching these kind of things, there's always instances from history that you can draw upon, or be inspired by in some part, that isn't always a fun read, in a sense. And what you're trying to do is translate that into some form of gameable material that keeps within the framework of what the game is meant to be. And it's a game of horror and mystery, so we are dealing with bad things. It's the nature of horror, but it's understanding where where the line is drawn, and providing appropriate advice within the book, within this book and others, about supporting not only the keeper running the game, but the players running the game, and encouraging people to have those kind of discussions before games start, to allow people to kind of set their own boundaries, because all groups are very different, and some groups are going to be very mature, and they're going to want to explore what you might consider kind of quite dark and gritty kind of material, and very quite strong material in that sense. Well, another group may be very different, and maybe not want to explore to that kind of level of depth, and some of the more kind of gritty aspects would be glossed over, or they'll fade to black, or ensure that certain material never enters the game, because that's not what they want in their game. And so we have to kind of advise and support people in terms of ensuring that the game they're playing is fun and they feel comfortable and safe playing it. There's no, otherwise it doesn't become, it's not a game anymore. It's not a fun experience. And the whole point is it's a fun experience. So when you're dealing with kind of, bad things, ensuring that there is appropriate kind of, guidance and encouraging people to discuss these things up front, so the group is all on the same page when they actually play the game, is an important kind of aspect of this kind of style of game, whether it's Call of Cthulhu or another horror game in that sense.
One of the things that Mike said that I'd like to touch upon is that he brought up the complexity of human behavior and the whole spectrum of it. And I think that's what makes these cults so appealing as antagonists, is they are complex. They have personal lives. There's reasons why they're in these cults, and these reasons are very human reasons and things that we can all relate to. Now, obviously, joining a cult is not something most people would do, but it's important to understand why these people do the things that they do, and you almost have some empathy for these motivations. And there's a spectrum. Some people are homicidal maniacs, and other people are just maybe making, they misjudge the situation. They're in a group of people they think are maybe on their side, and they're thankful for that, and they're not involved in the killing or the stealing or doing the horrible things or summoning the gods. They're just, maybe they're an admin person. There's this whole different there's all these different levels in a cult, and not everybody is somebody with a knife and a hood ready to stab you and take out your heart and serve it up to a god. And I think that stuff is really fascinating. And if you want to go in depth, I mean, that's what this book is all about, is to really look at these organizations.
And it comes at a good time too. It seems like we're back fascinated about them, especially with like movies like Midsummer. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Where movies like that are coming out, and people are kind of exploring that version of folk horror. But to get back to the book, so there's also new rules. I read somewhere that there's a worksheet involved for keepers to help keep track of things. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. There's a worksheet, kind of a process of designing a cult. So it goes into, the things that you need to think about, the structure of the cult, who leads the cult, coming up with a cult leader, what their motivations are. And this worksheet sort of helps you go through all those steps to flesh out your cult and your cultists, and to think of, the scale of your cult. Is it just maybe 7 or 8 people that work out of the basement of a church somewhere, or is it hundreds of people in a worldwide organization? All that can be figured out when you're doing your worksheet, when you're going through this process and figuring out what your cult is, what they do, what are they after. Cults, some cult may want some kind of magical device. Some are looking for some sort of earthly gain. Maybe they're looking for immortality, or at least maybe the cult leader is looking for immortality, and he's using the cultist to serve his own ends. Again, all this story and all these characters are going to be developed by going through this worksheet, which kind of takes you through the steps.
Yeah, there's kind of various kind of, as Chris has said, there's various stages to it, and there's ideas and questions that are posed for you to kind of consider, what do I want in this case for the kind of plot I want to develop. And to support that, there are various kind of tables and choices to make, and you can roll things randomly, but often, we advise, pick the ones that interest you, or the ones that fit your kind of concept that you started with. And it just helps to give a bit of definition. And in terms of the actual, who's running the cult, who's the cult leader, there's additional kind of material around. Lovecraft kind of talks about these kind of undying masters who are kind of hidden away, and kind of who are the kind of puppet masters of the grand kind of Cthulhu cult. And so there's some material on these kind of undying masters, these deathless ones, that kind of talks about, what they could be, and offers different options and alternatives. But again, provides some details about how you might design your own, who might be your kind of, number one kind of villain in the campaign who doesn't get revealed to till much later in the campaign, and realize that this is the one who's been pulling the strings. And there's some examples of those as well in the book that you can just plug and play into your campaign if you don't want to actually go through creating one yourself. So a lot of the material is about trying to support you to develop the kind of plot and mystery that you want to build for your player group, basically, and it supports all of that.
And let's talk about the three adventures. I find it very fascinating that they take place in different time periods. Was that intentional? Is it meant to be linked together, or they meant to be standalones? Can you talk about that?
Sure. The three cults. Well, obviously, playing Call of Cthulhu, the three main settings are either Gaslight, the 1920s, and then modern day Cthulhu. Those are the ones I played in mostly. So I felt like we needed to kind of show cults in those different eras. And there is a connection between them. You could play it as a campaign. You would have to play it with different characters because the time span's so wide, but they could be descendants from the characters. There is a link, but that can be ignored. They can be played as standalone adventures if you prefer that way, or you could maybe even adapt say the Gaslight story for a modern setting if you wanted to, but they are firmly set in the periods that they are written in. But there's some flexibility with that, and I just think it was really important to not only show the different time periods and how these cults function, but different sort of stratas of social castes, like wealthy people, poor people, artists, corporations, businesses, like try and show that cults can come in many different forms. And I think setting in those time periods made it more apparent, the differences that you can have in them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about the three scenarios is, to elaborate on what Chris said, they show quite different versions of a Cthulhu cult. They all worship Cthulhu in some way, but often across the three scenarios for very different reasons, and in very different kind of ways practically. There's one group that is very much about the magic and about kind of acquiring magical power. There's another group that's about trying to expand their consciousness effectively, and then there's one that's really just about good old somebody who's got a big ego and wants to be godlike themselves. They see this as a route to becoming like Cthulhu. And so they're very, very different motivations, and the time periods, kind of help to reflect that in terms of the characters. And so while they're all dealing with the same subject matter, they will play quite differently in a sense across the sort of playing them all three. And that you could easily slot. If you wanted to slot one into your current campaign, say it's in the modern day or the 1920s, you could slot it in and do it as a kind of a one-off within your grander campaign. Equally, they could if you wanted to start a new campaign, they could be the starting points. And because of the nature of the cults, you could deal with them all with the scenario, or there are loose ends that can be drawn out, and they could be the starting block for a whole campaign of you kind of combating this cult that you've discovered basically in the the Victorian era or whatever. So they're very versatile in that way. But equally, it would kind of be cool to play them all three with a different group of investigators from each one, and the players are the kind of the common link. And it's there, while the characters won't necessarily know everything from the other scenarios, the players will, and they will find the cool Easter egg links and things like that, which would be kind of cool as well. But there's a million ways you can the permutations for how you want to incorporate these and run these. So we try and keep it as versatile as we can, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there anything more that the book has or offers that I didn't mention about?
Yeah, there's a cool history of Cthulhu cults, which is based off of mostly Lovecraft's work, but also a bunch of stuff that I have made up and I thought would be cool to kind of give you an idea of what Cthulhu cults might have looked like, over the last 3,000, 4,000 years. There's also some great new monsters, some new spells. Anything else, Mike? What else?
Yeah, there's also there's an appendix at the back, which one of the kind of cool things about Call of Cthulhu games is the kind of the ancient, forbidden tomes that the characters can find and get information on. And in the appendix, there's a whole list of tomes and books. And there's a little bit of advice about which ones might tell you more about Cthulhu or aspects of Cthulhu, Dagon or whatever it may be, and they kind of go through and kind of give you a percentage value almost for every tome. So if it comes up in the game, you can work out actually this tome has got a lot of information potentially about Cthulhu. This one's not so much, and you can kind of use that to kind of decide how much you want to give over to the player characters. So there's a bit of advice about that and guidance around using tomes and the information the players can draw from those in game. Again, just to kind of be an additional kind of a bit of a help for a keeper who's in the middle of a game and needs a tome, and which one would be a good one. What I can quickly look and see this one could be good and throw it in or use it in terms of their planning for a scenario. So that's another piece there. But mainly that that's all the kind of the highlights. But it's a pretty large book. And there's a lot of granularity in it. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of advice in terms of for keepers in terms of running with this kind of material and how to use it not only in game but in terms of preparing your plots and scenarios and things. So it's kind of everything you want to know about the Cthulhu cult and never thought you could ask. This is the book for it.
Okay.
And of course, it's all translatable. Although it's Cthulhu, if you really into Hastur or Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth, and you really want to create a cult for one of those, obviously most material here is very adaptable. You can use the same processes, etc., with changing out Cthulhu for whichever kind of great old one you desire. So it's all very very practical in that way.
Okay. And just so my Pulp Cthulhu fans aren't upset, is there any difficulty in conversion between Call of Cthulhu and Pulp Cthulhu?
No, in fact, a lot of the kind of key NPCs in the book have some alternative Pulp Cthulhu stats there just to make life easy for everyone. There's it's completely usable with Pulp Cthulhu, in that way. So there's nothing hard to using it with Pulp in that sense. So it's equally usable.
So I have one more question and then we'll wrap up. If I was using this book and I was the keeper and you were my investigators, who would you play?
Oh boy.
Let's say 1920s.
1920s. My default is the grizzled PI. I just love playing the grizzled PI because not only do you have the brains and the chutzpah, but you got guns.
I guess if Chris is playing the the brains and so on in terms of having a bit of street savvy, either I guess to complement that I'd choose the kind of the hapless librarian or professor who's got a bit of knowledge but isn't any use practically. Can't fight anything, can't run. Is more of a hindrance. Every time he tries to sneak somewhere, will make a lot of noise. Somebody like that, or maybe the down at heel boxer who's never really made it. He had an attempt at the title, but it watered away and it melted away, and he never got anywhere. And he's got a rough and tough life, and but he's got a heart of gold. So when he's told that him and this private eye are all that's stopping the world from exploding, then he'll follow suit and put his life on the line. There you go. That's what I think that's what I'd do.
Excellent. And this is the PDF is coming out on Halloween, and then I guess the physical version will be out sometime after.
Yeah, I mean, normally in in normal times, we'd say about 3 months after the PDF release, the hard copy print release will follow. And in theory, that should hopefully be this case. But obviously, in the world we are now living in, with shipping delays and all sorts, it's a little harder to say. But certainly, in the hopefully sometime in Q1 2021, the print book will be available. And suffice to say, it will follow the same format as other Chaosium releases. If you do buy the PDF of the book from chaosium.com, then the cost of the PDF is deducted from the print costs, should you wish to then go and buy the print when it comes out.
That's a great deal.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you both for taking the time to talk to us about your new book. I'm very excited about it. And to our viewers out there, please be safe and have a happy Halloween. Take care.